Hello, welcome to the Compassionate Men's interview series. And today I'm thrilled to be talking to Elad Levinson, Program Director of Spirit Rock Meditation Center in Northern California. Elad has 40 years experience as a psychotherapist and 20 years working and leading men's groups. So, Elad, you've been on the cutting edge of men and compassion for a long time now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not the reason why I got into working with men. I didn't consciously think about compassion as being one of the objects, but it turned out to be a very important part of what happened in men's groups.
Great, great. So I'm going to try pick your brain about how we can incorporate this compassion into the lives of modern men.
Great.
First, I want to know a little bit about you. So, um, how did compassion become a driving force in your life, or how did you find that love and compassion were an important factor in either your personal life or your happiness?
Well, there are two factors. One of them is that I was raised in the Jewish religion. And Judaism is filled with teachings and references to compassion, and some of those references have to do with the method that one expresses compassion, which can range from anonymously, so that you're not personally benefiting from being compassionate to others, to the cultivation of compassion. So from a very early age, it was something that was kind of in the conversation, if you want to put it that way. And then secondly, and a part of that also was that I was very active in the Jewish Community Center as a volunteer, kind of starting at 13, and then worked my way up to running the residence camp for the Jewish Community Center. And the camp had a lot of emphasis on social responsibility, which I see as a form of compassion. So it was the coupling of compassion with right action. And then the last thing I would say is that I happened to be raised by a mother who, not by my saying, but by everybody who knew Ruth, would say she was a saint. Just this extraordinary spiritual being. And she exuded loving kindness. I mean, she just embodied it. So, if you were around Ruth, you were around compassion.
Wow, that's so interesting because oftentimes when we think of cultivating compassion cultivating compassion, we often think of Tibetan Buddhism, we think of Buddhism a lot. And it's interesting that you came from a completely different religious perspective, but we're taught the same ideals of compassion and loving kindness, but maybe in just using different terms or different ways.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who I know that were raised in Judaism, in some ways, were primed to become Buddhist because there were there's in some ways there are a lot of similarities. What's different that I found in Buddhism was the precision with which the skills can be developed by training. I didn't find that in Judaism. There were more kind of aphorisms or abstractions about the importance of compassion as compared to this is how you cultivate it.
Wow, yeah, yeah. Let's jump to that right now. So, what types of daily practices do you do to cultivate compassion or to make compassion an important part of your life?
Mm. Well, one thing that I've been doing for several months is that before I go to sleep, the last thing that I go to sleep with is doing loving kindness practice. And I will be very specific about both people and what conditions I know that they're in, and that my wish for them is that those conditions either be lifted or ameliorated or and of course I do include myself in the practice so that I'll kind of end the meta practice with may I be have ease of well-being, may I be healthy and happy. Um, so that's one thing. Another thing is that um, I have been kind of formally studying karuna, compassion, and metta, loving kindness, mudita, the joy for other people's well-being, by going to many, 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 many retreats at Spirit Rock, and I notice that what happens now is that compassion arises spontaneously in very interesting ways. Like I was driving from Petaluma to San Francisco, and it took me 45 minutes to get from Petaluma to Novato, which is only about 7 miles. And in that kind of a situation, historically, I would be pounding my steering wheel, But instead, what happened, and I didn't try to make this happen, but what arose spontaneously was a feeling of loving kindness and compassion for all of those people who had to do that drive every day. And it really settled me down. It was like, oh my God, I don't have to do this every day. I'm so fortunate, but I'm so sad that this is the condition that people are living in. I hope that they find something that makes the drive easier.
Wow. Wow. So you shifted from like, I'm not getting my desires met to, wow, I feel compassion for all these other people. Would you kind of went from a focus on self to a focus on connection to others. That's
what
incredible.
happened.
That's great. And then I want to touch on something that you talked about, that you do spend part of your evening ritual focusing on yourself. And I think that's really important, especially for men, that we practice self-compassion, right? That we don't just focus on compassion for others, but we also turn that compassion towards ourselves.
Well, I think that, informal training, and one of the things that Spirit Rock does is that when almost every retreat, there's a formal metta or loving kindness practice during the day. It's built into the schedule. And so if you go, what you hear over and over again is start with yourself. Always start with yourself. And because if you can't have loving kindness for yourself, you're not going to really be able to offer much to others. And that was, I know that part of what you want to know is kind of how this has developed over time for me, because I think it'd be good to give a contrast, because I think it would be safe to say that most of my young adulthood, and certainly going into kind of my early 30s, that I was really plagued a lot with self-hatred. It would take a lot of different forms. It would take the form of addiction. It would take the form of being with people who are really unsuitable to be with. It would take the form of just thoughts that would go through my mind about, you're such an idiot. How could you have possibly done that? Really excessive judgment. And I tried a lot of different things to get over it. I asked and all these human potential things. Nothing touched it. Pretty much, it was unresolvable. And then when I started doing loving kindness practice, and I was first introduced to it through Sharon Salzberg's book, Loving Kindness, that was a revolutionary concept to me. That you would sit and you'd visualize yourself and that you'd wish yourself well. And I tell you, as a man, my reaction to that was probably fairly typical. It was like, come on, you are being a wuss, Levinson. Like, no way are you going to sit here and wish yourself well. That's for chicks to do.
Yeah.
It took a long time for me to get over that conditioning of, first of all, you don't act in a vulnerable way, and you don't admit that there's something that you're dealing with that you can't solve on your own, or just tough it out, or
Yeah, toughen up, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Suck it up, baby.
Yeah, suck it up, right? Like that segues into a question that I wanted to ask you, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but you being program director of Spirit Rock, you have you see all the programs coming, you see the attendance coming. I see this dynamic going on. I guess you call it a dynamic. So there tends to be all these men, compassionate men leaders, right? And you talk about Jack Kornfield, you talk about Gil Fronsdale down at Insight Meditation. I just went and saw Adishanti. And then you can extend that out to the Dalai Lama and perhaps even Jesus. And then below them seems to be a whole group of women followers, right? And the image that I always recall is like Jesus on the cross, and who's with Jesus on the cross is Mary and Mary Magdalena, right? So you have just all these women followers, and the average man seems to either be disconnected from this, to be not motivated, or I like the way you phrase it, kind of like, this isn't for me, this is kind of chick stuff, right? And I'm wondering, do you see that same dynamic, that same phenomena? And if you do, how can we make this not so, I guess, feminine for men, or make it more attractive to men, or sell them on it, I guess. I mean, I hate to use that term, but
marketing compassion for men.
Yeah, because the truth about it is, I think men need this compassion, right? Almost more than anybody else in the world today. Men need this compassion. That's my belief. So
this is the area where, for me, it becomes very complex. And the reason why I say that is that it kind of moves it out of the realm of looking at it strictly from a Buddhist philosophic or psychological perspective. So from one point of view, you could argue that men and women are exactly the same, that they have exactly the same minds, that the minds tend towards aversion, which is, hatred and fear, and they tend towards desire, which is greed and longing, and delusion, which is not seeing things as they are. But then if you look at it from a relative perspective, relative meaning like, here we sit, in these bodies in this time, then there's this extraordinary amount of cultural conditioning that is not going to be undone in 2 or 3 or 4 generations. And I think that the cultural conditioning for men begins with the kind of neurobiologic imperative that you're going to at some point be in battle, you're going to have to protect your family, you're going to have to protect your village, your tribe, and that you're the one who's most likely to have to be called upon to do that. And so that you're always, in a sense, kind of being ready for warriorship. And for a lot of men, being a warrior is contradictory to being vulnerable. And I think to be compassionate and to experience loving kindness, whether it's for yourself or for others, or to receive it from others, requires a level of vulnerability that flies in the face of that kind of armoring that men have been doing for thousands of years. And so that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I want to say is that again, culturally, men are not early adopters of psychological or spiritual solutions. They tend to kind of focus on the things that are really important to them, which is the workplace, or their kind of prowess physically, or it requires a kind of receptivity, like to be able to really develop compassion. You have to slow down. You have to be able to really kind of do the kind of introspection and reflection that psychologically are not, men tend to not be cultivating.
I love the example you give about you in traffic, right? But what else do you think like cultivating compassion can do for you in your life to make your life more happy, peaceful, loving, full, wholehearted?
Well, one thing that's terrific is that there's an extent of research that has been published that has demonstrated the effects of compassion that are so profoundly positive that just if you read like if you did a literature search on the relationship between compassion and its impact on people's physical well-being, psychological well-being, relational well-being, that it's in some ways it's kind of a panacea. Like it really does, like cultivating compassion does have a profound physical impact. Like you feel more relaxed. You are not defending yourself, so there's not that same kind of level of tension. And then also you're not perceiving others as being a threat. Compassion eventually leads to being able to see each other as kind of coming from the same rootstock. We're all humans. We all have this desire, as the Dalai Lama says, we all have in common that kindness makes us feel happy and that we feel good about being kind. The other thing that, Buddhism teaches is that the natural state of human beings is compassionate. So it's kind of a funny delusion in a way, like we have to cultivate compassion. We do, because we've unlearned what's natural, in the same way that the natural state of our mind is open, spacious, clear, and relaxed. But most of us don't experience our minds like that. So really what we're doing is we're reverting to our natural state when we begin to experience compassion. I think a lot about the kind of condition that we're in. I just finished a terrific book that was How the Internet is Changing Our Brain by a guy named Nicholas Carr. That's the subtitle. The title is The Shallows. And it confirmed for me things that I had observed. So like, for example, I had a consulting practice doing facilitation training, stand-up training in corporations for many, many years. And then I got hired as the director of learning and development for Agilent, which was a spinoff of HP. And it was the first situation it was 2005. It was the first situation in my work life where I worked almost entirely non-co-located. So all of the people who reported to me were spread out all over the world. And most of my time was spent in meetings in the internet. And I began to notice about 6 months into it, I couldn't read. I couldn't focus the way that I have very good concentration. My concentration was beginning to diminish. I couldn't go deeply down into a subject that I tended to my brain was now beginning to skip and surf and skim, just the way we do on the internet. And, so in response to what you're saying, what occurs to me is that, as has been demonstrated for 50, 60 years, the society we live in is not good for us. I mean, either you're going to come to a realization that what you're going to end up doing is to essentially live in a counter-cultural manner. Now, that doesn't mean that you are not involved in the world. It doesn't mean that you're not engaged with the internet and, with the benefits of it. I take a much more moderate approach that there is some real value and benefits to doing this. I mean, I didn't have to drive to Berkeley today, and you didn't have to drive to Woodacre. So there are clear benefits, but at the same time, the things that are keeping us from feeling compassion or from feeling peace of mind are the cultural benefits that we think of as like, oh, this is so wonderful, I can connect with these people on Facebook. Well, actually, there are some research studies that are showing that people spend time on Facebook end up being agitated, more jealous and more envious of their friends, and feeling more isolated. So I actually think that if you really want to experience quiet and peace of mind, that the way you do that is you first put yourself in a situation where you have such a deep contrast between the state that you went into, went from and to. So doing a 5-day retreat where it's completely silent and the only talking is listening to a deep Dharma talk, a talk about the nature of the mind. At the end of that 5 days, you have enough of a contrast of what it's like to have more peace of mind. And for many people, it becomes a motivator of wanting to begin to change not the circumstances so much of their life, but the way they relate to those circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great advice, right? Like we almost need like cold turkey intervention.
We do. We do.
Which I mean, feel free to plug Spirit Rock, because Spirit Rock is, you just go to spiritrock.org, right?
Yeah.
Spiritrock.org, and the thing I love about Spirit Rock is they got programs going all the time, multiple programs, right? Like you go to some meditation retreats, and like I'm trying to do a Vipassana, right? And they have one in October, another one, and this one's full, and you got to kind of have to schedule it in. But Spirit Rock, there's always something going on, right?
Well, last year we had 40,000 people come to our day-long or classes or workshops, which are in the lower campus, wow. And those are non-residential. And we had about 5,000 people come to retreats.
Wow!
And right now, I'm looking out my window, and what I'm seeing are 200 plus acres of rolling hills, and there's some wild turkeys that are walking by, and some deer and some quail. And that's what you're treated to. First of all, the environment is actually spectacular in West Marin. And then the other thing is, and of course I'm biased, we have some of the greatest teachers in the entire world here. And you can pretty much sign up for any retreat, and you're going to get high quality Dharma teachers who are going to really help you train your mind and your heart.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm actually coming up there next Sunday to see Rick Hansen.
Oh, one of my favorites.
Yeah. And so you just said you had 40,000 non-residentials come through Spirit Rock last year. Can you give me the demographic breakdown on what percentage are men and what percentage are women?
Well, what I know is that the primary demographic are women between the ages of 45 and 65. So that's kind of the overwhelming majority, certainly overwhelmingly Caucasian, although we do a lot to try to make it really easy for people of color, people who are differently developed, to come to Spirit Rock and to partake. The percentage of men, my memory, and it's at 66, it's less than it was a while ago, is that it's about 28% men, about 30% men.
So it's a very small percentage of men taking advantage of that.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, we talked a little about this the first time that we met, and I suspect, first of all, Spirit Rock does not and has not for several years really made the effort to try to program directly for men. I keep on getting kind of nudged by my colleagues, like, okay, so are you going to do that? Are you going to start having men's groups, men's study groups? So, I'm new here. I've only been here about 5 months. So I'm still getting used to kind of understanding what we currently have. But when I think about, we're going to have a brand new community meditation hall in 2015 that will have 3 rooms. Right now we have 1 room, and it will have room for 30 people, 60 people, and 400. And that gives me a lot more flexibility as the director to be able to think about doing very specific programs for populations that right now I don't have that kind of flexibility.
How has compassion affected your relationship, especially with your wife or with your close, intimate friends and family?
Well, I don't mind answering the question. I'm very, very fortunate that I've married somebody who is a very serious student of the Buddha Dharma. And so we have this language in common. And she has the capability of being able to kind of step back from her own reactions and process them instantly and be able to recognize when she said something that is harmful or hurtful. So that's a tremendous blessing to not have to do that for someone. If I were in the position of having to constantly kind of remind her of the effect that she's having on me, or the effect she's even having on herself because she's being not compassionate, that would be like being her therapist, or would be like her being her father, and that would change the relationship, and it wouldn't be good for either one of us. But because she's so deeply responsible for her own kind of psychological and spiritual life, that she makes it really easy to be compassionate, with her. And secondly, I think a large part of how I define love is cutting people a break. Like, come on, like, why? So what I mean by that is that we all have personalities. As one of the great monastic teachers here said, our personalities die 20 minutes after we do. Uh, so you are going to be who you are. You could be very enlightened, but you're going to be who you are. And so I am, and she is, and we both have our foibles. And compassion, I think that's where humor comes in. It's like, okay, like, cut each other slack, be generous. Let these kind of ways that we are idiosyncratically just be something that we love about the person, not something that we hate.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I like how it brings us around full circle again to what you began talking about, is that we start with ourselves, right? And the fact that your wife has been working with herself has made compassion easier for you, compassion easier for herself, compassion, and made this beautiful, compassionate relationship. Elad, thank you so much. It's just always a pleasure to talk to you. Like, from the first time I got to talk to you on the phone, and you're just full of wisdom, and I really appreciate your guidance, and I appreciate just the fact that you're kind of your open-mindedness to all different things, to either whether it's evolutionary, generational, all these different factors that you're able to juggle and take open-mindedly. But thank you so much. I'm sure I'm going to come up and see you at Spirit Rock. Well, maybe we'll be at the same. Although Spirit Rock's getting so big, I don't know if we'll find each other. But
we will.
Yeah, we'll cross paths.
Yeah.
Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
I enjoyed it.
Thanks,
All right.
Elad. Take care.
All right.